I want to spend a few minutes talking about a guy named David Fowler, who is essentially our buddy Bob Vander Plaats is off today. David Fowler is, for lack of a better description, the Bob Vander Plaats of Tennessee. Right? He's like their main pro-family group leader down there. And it was his group that had me come down and speak in the Nashville area a couple weeks ago now. And you might recall that we got connected with them shortly after, what was this, like maybe 2 years ago now. And they had a full Republican legislature, Republican governor. And this one was supposedly Governor Lee much better on the life issue than Haslam was, I think his predecessor. He was more of your corporatist type. And so they were going to go full bore on the life issue. And National Right to Life sent their pit bull down there to try to stop them from doing it. And I talked at the time about when I was heavily involved with personhood on a national level, or the idea of, or life at conception, whatever you want to call it. When I was heavily involved at the national level, we went into 5 or 6 states, and in every state we went into, 2 groups opposed us every time. The archdiocese did every single time, and National Right to Life did every single time. Every place we went, they opposed us. And the reason being, well, there's 2 reasons why. One is Gaston Mooney, one of our mucky mucks here at the Blaze, and he used to serve on Capitol Hill as I think chief of staff for Jim DeMint, and kind of was his liaison to conservative movement media figures on Capitol Hill, and ran a lot of that stuff for him when Jim DeMint was in the Senate. He said they used to call it, amongst the conservative senators, they used to call it, quote, big baby. Where like they would like convince them not to do a more aggressive or principled pro-life stuff because they were just more interested in raising money off of it. That's part of it. The other part of it, though, is I think that might be National Right to Life's issue on a political level. I don't, having had conversations with members of archdiocese over the years about this, the Catholic Church isn't lacking for money. Okay. I don't think that's it. I don't think this is a fundraising thing. I think this is a philosophical thing. And the philosophical thing really comes down to this question. What is the law? And as a follow-up, where does the law come from? That I think a lot of, and I've seen this over the years work its way into evangelicalism as well, by the way. I think a lot of Christendom believes in a legal theory that has sometimes been known as what's called legal positivism. And much like stare decisis, they will tell you that what I'm going to tell you is the definition of this is not the definition, but it is. Like, it may not be the textbook definition, but if you look at the way they carry it out, right? You know a tree by its fruit. Do you know a tree by its trunk? No. You know a tree by its fruit. Okay? So they may tell you that that's not what it means, and that's not the textbook definition. But ultimately, the fruit that it produces says that is what it means. Like, they will tell you, if you get into law school and you tell them stare decisis means that everything any judge says at any point in time is the law, and there's nothing people can do about it except obey it. Any edict, no matter what it is, no matter how immoral, how silly, it's the law. They will tell you that's nonsense. And they'll laugh you out of law school like John Houseman laughed you out of the paper chase back in the day. Except if you look at the way we run our country, that's really the definition, right?
It is.
Anything a judge says, no matter how dumb, how wicked, how immoral, how stupid, vapid, banal, banal, no matter what it is, it's just the law, and there's nothing we do, courts have spoken. So you can tell me that's not the textbook definition, but you know a tree by its fruit, and that's the way we live out what stare decisis means. Similarly, legal positivism really means whoever has the most gold gets to make the rules. That whatever authority is recognized, whatever human authority is recognized as being in charge determines what the law means. Man, and I had conversations with archdioceses where I would say to them, can you imagine how much easier St. Peter's life would have ended up if you just would have recognized your definition of legal positivism? And if you just would have said to Nero and Diocletian and Caligula and the whole batch, you just would have said, you know what? You guys kind of have a point, you know? All right, man, I'll bow the knee. Caesar's Lord. Why not? I mean, you're the law. You're the law here. How many fewer martyrs would we have needed if only we would have recognized legal positivism in the 1st and 2nd century?
Here I stand, but you make some really good points, so let's meet halfway.
Polycarp, what a waste. Just throwing away 86 years or whatever he was. Burned alive. All he had to do was just take the knee to Caesar one time. They would have left that poor old man alone. Faster than you can say slow Joe, right? What a stupid decision that was. Now they will tell you, well, that's not so. It is. When you look at the way they carry out what they believe. I thought y'all over there on the Catholic side were all into the faith without works is dead, right? Well, if I look at the way you work this thing out, the way that you're communicating this to me and to the world is that ultimately what the Supreme Court says is the law. The Supreme Court is the supreme being. But you know what? I started having conversations with major leaders in American evangelicalism as well. You know, the sola scriptura folks. Same exact thing was going on. In the end, whatever the Supreme Court says, that's what we do. It's why Father Frank Pavone, a guy who was laying down over railroad tracks to stop abortions before, you and I knew what an abortion was, he goes to states now and advocates for euthanizing or anesthetizing babies before they're aborted to take the pain away. I'm serious. I'm not making that up. That's true. Because ultimately it comes down to you think this is a government by the government for the government, not the people. And that unelected judges determine what the law is. And we as believers just have to cut the best deal we can. And you're going to see this play out here in what I'm about to read to you. Were you going to say something there before I move on? This
argument was used regarding King Davis amongst people you respect.
Yeah. A guy that I go to for a source for my apologetics. That's what I'm thinking of. Okay. One of my buds, we got into this several years ago when that story was going on. He wanted her to resign. I'm like, resign for what? Keeping her oath of office? Man, imagine, dude, the apostle, you mean to tell me that John didn't have to get boiled in acid and exiled to Patmos? He could have just resigned. He could have just said I had to resign. I'm going to resign. No low contender, I'm out. Could have just resigned. Polycarp could have just resigned.
There's an apocrypha about all this somewhere.
Yes. Ultimately, it is because we do not believe in the laws of nature and nature's God that we founded this republic on. We believe in the laws of man. That's why I love Letter from a Birmingham Jail so much, because it is Martin Luther King Jr. rebuking liberal white Protestant ministers who want him to obey the segregation laws and wait for the courts to decide like they did on Brown versus Board of Education. And he said, I'm not waiting for one court precedent. We've been waiting 400 years. We're done waiting. We want the laws of nature and nature's God. We want what Augustine said. Any man-made code that doesn't square with the law of God is to be opposed because it is no law at all. We want that. That's what we want. And he quotes Augustine, Blackstone, Aquinas, all the people of throughout history that have kind of fleshed out what is a Christian or biblical understanding of civic law and its purpose and origins, and then also its limits and jurisdictions. And this is played out in what I'm going to read to you here for the next few minutes. David Fowler writes, Governor Lee's abortion legislation sailed out of the state Senate Judiciary Committee this week. This coming Tuesday, that's tomorrow, both the governor's proposal and the Rule of Law Life Act will be on the calendar for discussion in the House Health Subcommittee in Tennessee. If you are pro-life, you need to know the differences between these two types of proposals. While substantially different in their content and approach, the difference between the two bills is not in the motivation of their respective opponents. In the Senate Judiciary's abortion legislation hearings last summer, we had a professor said it well, quoting Blackstone's, there's that name again. Who's William Blackstone? He's the guy that essentially created the British common law system. That was the foundation of our own legal system. Jefferson, all the great, the lawyers of the founding of the country were all educated by Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. And one of the things Blackstone says, quoting from Aquinas, who was quoting from Augustine, any man-made code that doesn't square with the laws of nature and nature's God. If you wonder where we got that phrase, it's from that guy, okay? Jefferson just like make it up. It wasn't eloquent, all right? He got it from that guy. Any man-made code that doesn't square with the laws of nature and nature's God is not the law. And you have a civic duty to oppose it because it's immoral on its face.
Can I comment on that? It's not just pretty language. That's really important. It's scientific in its use. I mean, it's both. It is beautiful, but it's meant to be very specific. And we used to think rationally and reasonably. People have hijacked that term now, but you're dead on. It meant to point to something that was as clear as the sky is blue and the grass is green, which is why we must do it. Otherwise, it's insane.
Yes, and this college professor that they had come to Tennessee quotes from Blackstone, and here's a quote. Life is the immediate gift of God, a right inherent by nature in every individual. So right there, you see a reference to the laws of nature and nature's God. Life is the immediate gift of God, a right inherent by nature in every individual. According to the chief deputy to the governor and the governor's legal counsel, the purpose of the governor's legislation is to, quote, test the limits of current Supreme Court precedent while also allowing us to achieve in one instance the most protective provisions under state law that a court would approve, unquote. That sounds good, but notice the huge concession that is being made. Its proponents are conceding that the U.S. Supreme Court's current precedent, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, is equal to the words of the U.S. Constitution, and those precedents set the constitutional standard by which constitutionality of all abortion legislation should be evaluated. Amen. Maybe put it in another context. It's essentially saying the Dred Scott decision is equal to the Constitution, and all notions of the human rights of black people in America should be not equivocated to the Fifth Amendment, which says all persons, no person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Instead, the Fifth Amendment, which is in the Bill of Rights, should be overridden by the Dred Scott opinion that black people are property. Or Plessy versus Ferguson, which came in 1898. This argument that the governor of Tennessee is making is saying, maybe a governor in a place like Tennessee would have made this argument 100 years ago, would have said the 14th Amendment, which says equal protection under the law for all persons, which is a derivative of the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. We ignore all of that, and we now have separate but equal because the Supreme Court ruling on Plessy versus Ferguson in 1898 was equal or above the U.S. Constitution. That's the same argument that David Fowler is making in Tennessee. That's what the governor of Tennessee is making. He's right about that. And in letter from a Birmingham jail, that the precedent that you want to know what precedent Brown versus Board of Education overcame? Plessy versus Ferguson in 1898. It took them 56 years. 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education. It took them 56 years to overturn a Supreme Court precedent in 1898 that was in clear violation of the 14th and 5th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, in clear violation of it. Instead of just simply saying to the court, like Abraham Lincoln said in Dred Scott when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, appreciate your opinion, and that's all it is. I'm the president. That's hot garbage. I'm not doing that, but thank you. We should have done that with Plessy versus Ferguson. And you wouldn't have needed, think of 56 more years, how much injustice, inequality we allowed in the Jim Crow segregation South. And how that filtered into the bloodstream of all of America. That's more than 500 A century. Because they took one court opinion, Plessy versus Ferguson, and treated it like the Constitution itself, just as we have done with Roe versus Wade. And it's almost a half century there. I know, I was born the year of Roe versus Wade, 1973. What the governor of Tennessee is saying is that he is a legal positivist. He is saying that even though in his oath of office, it said to faithfully execute and uphold the laws of the United States, he is going to not do that, but is going to faithfully execute an execution order from an unelected tribunal 47 years ago as if it is the law. And he's going to challenge it in a way that doesn't actually challenge it. These are the same arguments segregationists made a half century ago in America, and it's the same arguments slavery advocates made a century and a half ago. All the same arguments. All the same arguments. No government official has ever taken an oath of office to uphold a court opinion as the law. It's never happened in the 240 plus years of this republic. But yet that's exactly what they're doing. And it's one thing if the governor of Tennessee says, hey man, I can't go out there. I'm not going to order the National Guard to board up the last 3 Planned Parenthood clinics in Tennessee and start a war. Okay, right? We're not asking them to be unreasonable. But how about if you're going to challenge it? Challenge it. Assert your authority as the governor of that state on behalf of all the people that voted you into that office, who didn't vote for a single one of those damn 9 Supreme Court justices up there now, nor any of the 7 that gave us Roe versus Wade 47 years ago. Assert your authority. Represent the interests of the people of the sovereign state of Tennessee. Challenge it then. If you're going to challenge it, then challenge it. You don't have the stones or don't think it's right to just unilaterally undo it. Now, if I was governor of any or all states, I would. Because Steve Deace don't give a care. What do you get? Tweet, I don't care. Was raised by Dave Deace. You're going to have to do far worse than your tweets. And I don't care what Nicole Wallace says on MSNBC. I don't care. But I get it. I'm a unique breed. Okay. And if you don't succeed, lower your expectations, right? I get it. Fine. But if you're going to challenge it then, if you're going to use the system that gave it to us to challenge it, then at least challenge it. At least challenge it. And if you're acknowledging Roe versus Wade as the supreme law, you're not challenging it. And so this is a question we have to ask as a movement. Do we want to regulate this and permit it? Or do we wish to end it? I am sure God will appreciate our efforts to work within the very system that gave us this child sacrifice and not hold us accountable generationally at all for our half-rear-ended efforts, our lukewarm efforts. I'm sure he won't spit them out of his mouth at all. I'm sure he'll feel very honored.